So good evening. My name is Ebony Tyler, and I, along with my colleagues, are delighted to welcome you to this month's Community Talk series, hosted by Our Future is Science. This series is a part of the Mentorship and Scholars Program of Our Future is Science. We are happy to welcome the public as Zoom allows us to democratize these programs. OFIS is an initiative of the Aspen Institute's Science and Society program. As an organization, we are committed to sparking curiosity, passion, and confidence in STEAM in young people to push science forward in the 21st century and solve society's most pressing issues. We are generously supported by Amagen Foundation, the Samueli Foundation, Burroughs Welcome Fund, 3M, and the Carson Family Charitable Trust. Without these funders, none of this would be possible. The Community Talk series is a platform to expose individuals to diverse careers, as well as information, insights, and perspectives on the intersections of STEAM disciplines and social justice issues. Tonight, we will focus on criminal justice, artificial intelligence, and bias. So I will turn it over to my colleague, Caroline Gelb, who will introduce tonight's speaker.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Thaddeus Johnson. Dr. Johnson is an assistant professor at Georgia State University's Andrew Young School of Public Policy and a senior fellow for the Council on Criminal Justice. An expert in policing, crime control, and governance equity, he has extensively researched police lethality and coercion, street violence, algorithmic and predictive bias, and correctional control. Dr. Johnson's research has been featured in national and international media and now on OFIS. And before academia, he served as a ranking law enforcement official. We are so pleased he is with us and know you'll learn a tremendous amount this evening. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Johnson.
Hello, thank you all for having me. And I'm just Thad, to anybody, we're all family and friends now. And so I just appreciate it. I'm so happy about being here. I do a lot of talks many times, and I was really excited about this one because, I don't take these opportunities lightly. And, the one thing that I wish I had known before I got this gray hair on my face, a lot sooner, the opportunities in science, in math, in STEM, right, that were available that can impact justice, impact policy. My wife is on here. If you see a name, Natasha Johnson, she's on here somewhere. We work together a lot, and we work in this space. She's also leading research that looks at the role of artificial intelligence in academia. We have ChatGPT and all these other tools. We have to find ways not to be afraid of these technologies, embrace it, and put up safeguards, right? So that's how we kind of tend to approach things. And I'm going to get into, the AI and the bias work, but I think it's really important when you talk to people, they know about you. This is your first time meeting me, right? So you can read the credentials, but you need to know the person. You need to know the motivation behind this actual work. So I'm born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, Tennessee is a civil rights mecca. It's a place that Dr. King was assassinated, right? My father grew up there during the time as a young man, the Jim Crow era. My mom, when it comes to the police, she would tell me to respect the police, to tell me to comply with the police, not because she really loved the police and anything like that. She just wanted me to come home. She was so afraid of the police and the history that Black people, particularly in the South, had with police when she was growing up. And so you can understand how that may shape my thinking coming up, how it can shape to make me less trusting of people who don't look like me. And it really shaped my whole world. And it gave me a drive to impact justice, right? And so I want to kind of quickly talk about tonight how I've been able to do that with my team and with this type of work, but also how this work forced me to wrestle with my own biases, things that I held to, that if I really wanted to work toward social justice, I had to make sure that I was just. And the scientific method and approach in doing this research was a pathway for me beyond what the findings were, beyond the processes. And so I just want to kind of share that with you a little bit tonight. And, as a police officer, they told you I'm a former officer out of Memphis. Never thought I would be an officer. not one of those families, right, where people put on the uniform, right? And so I had no plans on being a police officer. I had no plans on being an academic, and definitely had no plans on doing anything with race and justice. And it's far-fetched. You told me 10 years ago I would be an expert when it comes to AI and doing research in that space. And I can say that a lot is owed to me embracing science, embracing math, and no longer being afraid and intimidated by it. You know, as a police officer, I was so focused on the victim and getting justice for the victim that I forgot that oftentimes offenders have been victimized too. And so I want to tell you a quick story that was a turning point for me and really impacted how I view justice. I remember there was a serial robber, and he was brutal. I mean, he's brutal. I mean, he would catch people on cell phones in garages. I mean, he was really brutal. I think it was maybe 11 or 12 robberies that happened in the medical district. And we want to catch him, right? You know, we know this sense of justice. Well, I worked a double. My battery was dead on my walkie-talkie, and so on my radio. So I was going to headquarters. What do you know? Who do I see walking down the street? So I had to breathe a moment. Am I going to do this? Because I can't radio anyone. So I called out. I get out and I see him, and this man basically arrested himself. He almost put himself in cuffs. And what he was talking, what he had been through, why he was doing it. I was like, my God, I don't even want to arrest this guy. He needs help. But you also have to be held accountable. And so that really helped frame how we see justice. And for us, justice is accountability, it's mercy, and it's empowerment. And so when we research and use advanced statistical and quantitative methods, when we're assessing reforms, when we're assessing laws, or in this case, technologies, those are the three areas that we tend to center on. Does it make us more effective at holding people accountable? Does it provide a bit of mercy? And do we have avenues that we empower people so they don't return back to the conditions they got here in the first place? So that's really how we view justice really broadly and how we approach our work. And so, you know, the funny thing about using, you know, I'm the stats guy now in the department. Oh, Thad, he's the stats guy. He's the guy who does econometrics. Let me tell you something. I failed developmental math my freshman year in college 6 times. 6 times. And the reason why was because I could get the right answer, but I refused to document the process. And what I found out was that wasn't I was conforming. Here's the one more rule. I'm this black kid out of Memphis putting one more rule on me. No, it's about understanding the process because it has life lessons in that as well too when it comes to problem solving. And I was so focused on getting the right or wrong answer that I missed the journey and the important part, which is that process. So now I'm in a space where there is no right or wrong answer. I don't go in looking for an answer. You know, now there's discovery. I follow the scientific method and I discover, is this law equitable? Is this policy effective? Are there spillover and unintended consequences from the good things about the technologies that we'll talk about that we may implement? So these are things in how I'm able to use statistics. A person who has never taken a statistics class, YouTube, working hard, trial and error, that's science, trial and error, right? It's not necessarily you're the smartest person. You're resilient and you can learn from your mistakes. I was like, well, you know, that works for me. I make a lot of mistakes, so that means there's a lot of learning for me. And science is a perfect avenue for a person like me within rules, right? And so, you know, one thing too is that it also, in this process, I told you I had to wrestle with my own biases. We've done work. I'm this black guy from Memphis, right? So I don't even have to go there, right? We did work that showed that the criminal justice system has become fairer when it comes to imprisonment. It's become fairer in how they treat people post-arrest, right? I was like, man, no, something's wrong with the data's screwy, we messed up, I don't believe it. And I took a more rigorous approach. We took a more rigorous approach. We dug deeper, the findings got stronger. I was more convinced And I realized, oh man, I got biases, man. An answer can hit me right in the face, but because of my own self and getting away from the scientific purity, I can contaminate my own statistical models, which should be sterile and free from those things as much as possible. And so the more I dug, the more I found out, and the more I convinced myself that things have become better. But there's a lot of room for improvement. And now we're able to kind of pinpoint, because of that digging, the areas that we can focus on for actionable improvement. You know, and I'll get into the AI and the bias in these things, but you know, I think it's important to know that taking this approach, you know, I've been able to accomplish things and be in front of audiences that I never would have thought I would be at. I mean, I'm here with you all right now. You know, I've talked to, you know, the work that we've done, we've seen it come up in the executive order from President Biden's desk. We've got a chance to work with the White House science panels when it's talking about data collection on reforms that are both effective but also equitable, right? I mean, we've even had a chance to be on BET and do things like Trap Queens, right? And it's not because I'm special or I'm beautiful, right? I like to think I am, right? But the reason is because of an understanding of the data, being able to consume it, distill it, but also create it, be able to create knowledge through quantitative methods and statistics. And that could be a lucrative skill that you also can make a difference with. You know, we've seen our work impact policy. We talk to governors' staffs, right? We've talked to nonprofits. So we've been lucky and blessed to be an opportunity to use these skills to really impact policy. So one of the areas that we focus on is artificial intelligence, and particularly AI-enabled public surveillance, which in this case is facial recognition technology. Now, what you'll find out when it comes to criminal justice and policy, it's a space that's very reactive. And, you know, governance doesn't stop because you don't necessarily have the best evidence, but it doesn't mean that you do not continue to pursue it and adapt. And facial recognition, for instance, has been used since 2001. The only study that looks at its impact on crime control was our study that was published in 2022. A quarter of the nation's police departments are using these technologies, but we don't have any research to tell us, is it equitable or is it fair? We have anecdotes about false arrest of people of color from using this technology. And these things made us look. You have police staffing shortages. And look, criminal justice is not as attractive as it used to be. I would ask my students, who wants to be a police officer in the college class 2 years ago? Half the class. Since the pandemic, man, this last semester, nobody raised their hand. The one person wanted to be a federal agent, and they talked to me after class because they didn't want to do it in front of their classmates. That's what we're up against. And so we have to find ways to utilize technology. Look, we need police and public safety. We have things going on in our society that breeds crime, that are conducive to crime. And we're going to need armed guardianship. And we're going to have to figure out ways to amplify the size of the force through technology. So we got to do it responsibly. And this is the reason why we undertook this research. It's because we're hearing these things that it identifies Black people and people of color and women less accurately than it does white males. That's problematic. And we'll kind of get into there and talk on why. Before I get there, let me just go ahead and pull up my my screen. I made some pretty little slides. You know, I took my time. I don't think there's any misspellings. Let's see if I can remember how to share my, there we go, the big green button that says share screen. Maybe I should use that one. Okay, let's see if everybody can see. Can everyone see this? All right. So before we talk about facial recognition, I want to talk about the prevalence of artificial intelligence-enabled technologies in criminal justice and also real quickly in policing. So we have risk assessments tools, right? And these tools really, it's almost like you're trying to predict future behavior based on past behavior and different algorithmic formula that you input, right? But it's supposedly a race-neutral approach. But mind you, technology is only as race-neutral as the people that use it and the environments that they're used in. Technology is never a magic bullet. Discretion always ends with the user. It's about the human technology interface. So even though they tried to use an instrument that was race neutral, guess what? Systemic inequities concentrate police in these same areas that tend to be Black, brown people and marginalized and poor communities. So they have disproportionate contacts with police, not because they're more criminal, but because the systemic inequities kind of determine where police resources are deployed based on crime and these other things. Well, you're going to have disproportionate contact if you live in certain areas. But guess what? In Georgia, for instance, if you had a marijuana arrest and you're going up for parole and they use this instrument, it carries the same weight as a felony assault. So if you're a person in a neighborhood that has disproportionate contacts with police, you're going to accumulate a stiffer criminal history based on a recent needs assessment. This may impact whether you get out or the time that you have to serve. If there are systemic inequities that are going into the algorithm, the outcomes will likely be inequitable. So technology intertwines with the world around us. You know, we're using it in corrections and control, like I said, you know, evidence and case management, crime analysis. We're automating so many things with artificial intelligence and criminal justice. So we don't have the research to really keep up with it. And that's unfortunate, but this is not the only space that's like that. But when we turn into facial recognition technology, this is why can be scary if we don't get a grip on it. It's surveillance and it's artificial intelligence combined into one. So it makes it a little bit different than other technologies. And you know, and how do police use these technologies? Let's talk about it real quickly. This technology is used by police to infill queries. When you stop somebody or you arrest somebody, you run this image, an investigatory search. You have footage from a crime scene, and you're trying to see who came in and out the crime scene. And you also just have real-time scans in places like sporting events, concerts. If you go into a mall or a hospital, it's not many places that you're not going to be run through facial recognition of some sorts. And so it's pervasive and it's prevalent. And this is a problem. Facial recognition technology has an issue identifying darker skinned people. And that's problematic for several reasons. Because this technology can return, you see on here, a false positive or a false negative, meaning that they identify someone who's not really that person, misidentified, or they fail to identify a person who's in this database. This has public safety implications. You can have a whole lineup of people who are completely innocent, that they would get pulled in by the police, stopped and arrested, unwelcome contacts. Or you can have a full lineup where the police are not able to find the true culprit, and the person who has violated one of our citizens will not be held accountable. And so if it misidentifies Black people more often than others, that's a big public safety and an equity issue, meaning that victimization will go more likely to go unpunished, and also means that more people will be stopped and have unnecessary contacts before we find the right culprit. So this is why this type of research is so very important. Now, people may say, well, why is this? Well, there's a couple of things, and I'll get into why it may misidentify. But first, remember the concentration, the disproportionate concentration of police resources in certain neighborhoods. That means that this amplifies the arrest capability of police. This can codify already existing inequities. That's a big issue. Also, we tend to blindly trust these technologies, and officers have a lot of work to do, a cognitive workload that's heavy, it's burdensome, and they're trying to find shortcuts on how to do their job and do it more quickly and efficiently. Automating discretion can be problematic because it also puts psychological distance between officers. So not only are we possibly automating biases that we all hold on to, but we also are putting psychological distance between us and the people affected, making it more likely we won't recognize our biases or the impact of our decisions on people when we use these type of technologies to facilitate arrests and public safety outcomes. And so, and the one thing I think is so important, particularly for you all, and why we really advocate for diversity in STEM, this is the reason. If we want software that's more accurate and performs better on different groups of people. Now, let me say, it's not just a white or black thing. You know, in East Asia, software made by East Asian developers were able to recognize East Asian faces better than others. All right. And so this is a thing that we have that's called on race bias, right? We all suffer from this. And what this means is that you create programs that's better out of identifying faces that are similar to the ones of the programmers, in this case, young white males. Also, you train photos. Train these algorithms on photos. On race bias causes us to unconsciously train on photos that look like us. So if you have young white males who suffer like we all do from on race bias, this is going into the algorithms and statistics, we call it garbage in, garbage out. You can have world-class statistical models, world-class software, but if the information that has gone in is tainted, the outcomes will likely to be tainted and misleading. And so when you have it being trained on white faces, but many times we know that the system disproportionately impacts particularly young Black males, you're training it to mark Black faces as criminal. That's a big problem and a constitutional issue. Now, there's ways around that we may or may not have time to talk about. And let me say this. This is a quick synopsis. I want you all to know that you have access to me after this. I'm going to give you my information. You can email me. We can get on the phone. We can do whatever if you have questions, right? This is just a high-level conversation to expose you to these things and some of the issues that may be there. So that on race bias is a real big issue and a real big problem. But before I close, we researched this and we published a study on the impact on overall disparities in arrests. And we're working on a study now looking at its impact on violent crime control. So what we found is, these are our major findings. Facial recognition technology can contribute to racial disparities in arrests, particularly for property crimes. However, we have emerging research that shows we can use this technology responsibly, with oversight, with safeguards, and be able to reduce the rates of homicide and overall violence without exacerbating racial disparities in arrests or over-policing in underserved communities. And so we just need more research like this to start plugging away. And I'll shut up with this. When we found the finding that facial recognition technology does not contribute to disparities for arrests for violent crimes, we was like, oh my God, our previous study is wrong. But our previous study was on overall arrest, not by crime type. And when we broke it out by crime type, we said, well, it's not violence. We went and reran our models. And what we found was that the disparities we were picking up in our first study was for motor vehicle theft arrest and for burglary arrest. So using technology, using quantitative methods, using statistics and theory, we were able to pull out, well, if we're going to deploy this, these are the type of crimes where there's a higher propensity for inequities to creep in at. And so if you think about policy, if you think about practice, this is how we use our research to impact this space. I could go on, but I do want to hear from you all some. So I'm going to shut up right now, if that's okay. And I'd love to have a conversation about anything, answer questions, or even clarify some things, or be challenged. You know, science is about challenging as well, right? And so, or challenge what I may have to say. All those things are completely welcome. I'm going to stop sharing. Before I start sharing my screen, I'm going to put my contact information up. And I guess, you know, we can have Q&A while this is up so people can pull up if that's okay with everybody. So I'm going to shut up.
Thanks so much, Thad. I think this is a wonderful start to a really great discussion we all get to have together. So while you were speaking, luckily we had a lot of questions in the chat that we're going to get to and we'll coordinate. But before we get to that, I wanted to drop the attendance form in the chat. So this is for all of the mentees and mentors and ambassadors in the room to be able to mark their attendance. Mentees and mentors, don't forget to stay on after all of the Q&A for about 5 minutes, and we have a few updates that we're going to share with all of you. So going back to the Q&A, we'll start off with one of our mentees, Ishan. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, so my question was basically that is the reason that darker skinned people tend to be recognized by the software less accurately, the smaller available data set, or is it something else?
So if I'm correct, you were more talking about the training data set, is that correct? And is it about the size of it? So, I mean, that's the thing too, right? Because, you know, with algorithms, the more you train it, theoretically, the smarter they get, right? And so the more photos that you have of more diverse faces, the more diverse it can be in being able to recognize these faces. But if we have one group of people who are, and this is not indicting like, you know, young white males, it's not that, right? It just so happened they're the ones who take up the space. Remember I told you, same thing in East Asia, right? And so it's important not only that we have people who are able to create algorithms that are more diverse, but also it's the training photos. So yes, it's the size of the stock of training photos, but it's also the diversity of the photos as well. That's really, really important. Absolutely. And also, I mean, I didn't talk about juveniles, right? How it doesn't work on the faces of juveniles really. So it's also the type of library or repository that you use as well. So absolutely, great question. I hope I answered your question.
Looks like we're on to a great start. So KC, one of our mentors, would you like to unmute and ask your question? We'll give KC a moment. And
Hello?
Cassandra, you are up. There we go. Great.
Hi. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know if it was star six or star seven. So I had a follow on to the question that was just asked. So like, I wanted to know if you guys explored like how or what was the inaccuracies? Was it like the facial features? Was it that the technology wasn't good enough? Like I know a lot of cameras, we're just getting technology that can actually tell the nuances between skin complexion. And like, so I know like the Google Pixel did like a big initiative to try to like tell the skin complexities or try to get camera technology more developed. So I know there's some development, I know there's some technology issues there with like complexion, but I also wanted to know if it was like features, if it was like, you know, and like in what cases were the cameras in dark spaces? Like what were some of the parameters that you saw that caused these errors or misidentifications? Thank you.
No, that is a really, really great question. And I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to circle back around to Sean's question too, that exact same thing. You know, I generally ask people, you know, if you're a person of color, right? If you're ever taken a picture, have you been lighter or darker than you really are? I know I have, right? Unfortunately for me, I always look a shadow. I never get the lighter part, right? I get the shadow part for some reason, right? And so it's been a long-standing issue. And you can read on stuff about the Kodak card from studies like in the 1980s and 90s. It's the early 2000s study that if you're interested in that, I can send you some stuff on that as well. But how the pixels and all those different things that work over the camera lens and the imaging, it doesn't really pick up pigmentation really well. And the lighting becomes really important. And so new technologies have become better, more sophisticated, deep neural networks for to mimic human learning and thinking, but they perform well in the lab. So it's even if you get the highest quality camera like the Google Pixel and these technologies can improve these things, it's also this technology is sensitive to camera angle, it's sensitive to whether it's foggy, it's sensitive to the light or the dark, whether it's a clear shot, whether you have a face mask on or anything like that. So those things can be sensitive to that. And to answer your question about our research, there's not much data to pull from. we had to pull together various data sources from the big data from the government. So, the first study was like 1,100 cities that we pulled down from the Bureau of Justice Statistics data that asked whether the police departments use this technology. And the study that we've done now, we've done it over 20 years using 270 police agencies. And it's still these broad questions. There's other data set out there. It's a data set called the Atlas of Surveillance, where it will allow you to at least go in and see what police departments are using certain technologies, and also who's the maker of the software. So you also know that some software is more accurate. You have things like Clearview, Amazon, Microsoft, right? And several others that I'm forgetting that now you have data that will allow us to tease out to see if maybe there are some discrepancies based on the type of, or differences based on the type of software. But our research is a seminal piece, meaning it's the first piece. So we didn't get a chance to really dig into. The broad question was, are police using this technology in a manner that's equitable, in a manner that's effective? And so we hadn't gotten there, but those are really, really, really wonderful, wonderful questions. And anybody who picks this up has a long research agenda and career ahead of them. Thank you for that question.
And we have a healthy amount of questions in the chat, I'll say. We can keep the ball rolling. Cassandra, would you like to go next and unmute yourself?
Hi, excellent talk. Thank you so much for being here. I was just wondering, is there anyone who's actually against additional research for this, or like, I don't know, it seems somewhat like non-controversial to have better, I guess, okay, non-controversial is like not a great statement here, but like I know people are sometimes against surveillance, and I know people are mostly against racism. So who ends up being like the enemy to this funding politically?
Man, that is a really good question, right? Put me on the spot a little bit, but I can answer that. So, great point. So this is the thing, nobody has really been against it, right? It's a matter of having the data available. It's the matter of police agencies being more transparent in how they're using it, right? So it's not that anyone's against it. I mean, many cities that were, and this is what happens. It's a nice new shiny toy. It can help prevent crime. It can help us do more with less, and we grab it without the research, right? And then we start finding out things. So what you started seeing like 2016, 2017, when everybody was going toward it, that these studies came out that showed that from the government, they were less accurate. You had these false arrest narratives and anecdotes that came out, and people banned it. Cities like San Fran, Oakland, they stopped using it. And people were less supportive of it. Now, fast forward to the pandemic, the crime spike, staffing crisis, fear of crime has gone up. You look at polls now, people are in support of it. Despite the potential fallout, people are so afraid that they want to be protected, and they're willing to do whatever it means. Now, mind you, we had 9/11, and people readily gave up some of their Fourth Amendment rights and privacies to be surveilled in the name of security. And so we also see what goes on separately outside the system that impacts the system, but how public opinion ebbs and flows based on salient events, right? And so even places now that had once banned it, like New Orleans, they've gone back to using this technology because there's pressure on the chiefs and city to protect our citizens. But one thing that we do, we can't hire people, we go to technology. And so it's not a fact, it's more of the realities of governance that have gotten us where we're at. Enough researchers don't really understand it, right? It just so happened that, me and my group, we're so crazy enough or so foolish enough to kind of dive into new things and see what comes of it. And that's really how we got here. And so I'm surprised there's not more research out there. We've been on this since like 2020, and it's starting to pick up. And so it's not an enemy to it. It's just that fear of crime is high, police staffing issues are low, and people need to feel safe. Sometimes people feeling safe is more important than the level of safety because the fear exceeds the actual crime rates. But now it's about how do we utilize this and put up safeguards in a moment where we can revisit this? Because I think we're at a moment where technology is going to become even more important. AI is going to become even more important in our justice system than ever before. And I think we're at a watershed moment where we're ready to at least revisit what this means. You see Congress, President Biden, you see the AI blueprint of ethics. So you see these things are coming out, but as usual, they tend to lag behind the actual use of these texts. And I hope I answered your question.
Great, thank you, Thad. I think Caroline has a question to ask. We are gonna go right back to the mentee and mentor questions after this.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you have mentioned to us tonight and previously that your research can influence public policy and legislation. So we told you about the capstone project that students are working on and would love your advice for them in terms of reaching out to decision makers. So who should they reach out to and how? How can high school students get the attention of these decision makers?
Carolyn, thank you for that question. And let me tell you something. We were at a pre-trial conference, and we were presenting data about how affordable housing, investments in social services and communities, how it can have sustainable reduction, protective effects against crime. And that was one of the things that really came up. And it was a state senator there. And they were like, we need you to come down when we have state hearings. Now we have these things open and nobody comes. Well, we said, well, we don't know where they are. But when we talk to public officials, they're thirsty for this information. I think, we have this narrative that public officials are evidence and science averse, and that's not the case. And many times, particularly with high school students, not only does it look good, right, but many of them have a heart for high school students. And the truth be told, what high school students have, you're able to have this cloak of not being threatening, but we know that the bite can be and sting can be very potent, right? And that's a superpower that high schoolers have. And so I think, letters, particularly not just from one person, but several people that outlines, here's an issue and problems that we have. We've done some research. This is what we pulled and what we found. And we think that this is an issue that deserves being heard. And having several people sign off on it and being consistent with it, not just a one and done. That's how you influence it. Oftentimes we have, you have city council meetings where they open the floor to the public to speak. So I would say, focus on locally, on your local council. If you have an alderman, write a letter to your alderman, work with them. If there are civics engagements groups, right? If you're not old enough to vote yet, you're still old enough to volunteer and be involved with these agencies that really hold the same tenets and principles that you have about justice and hold the same concerns that you do. But I will say this, when we present evidence, there has not been any real pushback. And our leaders are much more sensible than oftentimes they are often portrayed when it comes to these matters. And so maybe that's not a magic wand type of thing, but it's reaching out. They will listen, and they are invested in their constituents. And so that would be one thing that we can say, no, we've done it. City council, we have a problem. We go down and talk about it. Sometimes it changed some things, sometimes it didn't, but we at least put them on notice and publicize the issue. And so sometimes you have to realize that there are different stages. And maybe the stage we're at is exposure and highlighting things before we can make a change. And policy change is a process, and we have to be in it for the long haul. So that's my words of wisdom, if they're wise at all.
Great, thank you so much.
And I'm sorry, one thing real quick to emphasize that. When we're looking at law change across the nation, what we tend to see that law change tends to follow public opinion. So what it shows is that the voters, we have a lot more power than we think. And so utilize that civic power and become civically engaged and pinpoint and research the areas that you want to impact. I'm sorry.
No problem. This is a good point. I think for all the mentees and mentors, it's important to remember that the evidence you're collecting, the data that you're going to be looking at, the research you're going to be conducting over the next few weeks and months, that's your shield, that's your suit of armor. That is the information that you're going to be processing and distributing out. I think a lot of times it's easy to be anxious if you're speaking to key decision makers or people in big offices, but remember that the work that you've done is important, and in many cases it's extremely relevant. So always have that confidence. If you feel a little bit uneasy, lean back on your data, lean back on your evidence, because that's going to be really strong.
No, great point. Data is your currency. Data gets you through the door. You can have conversations, and if you just base a conversation around data, it's hard to dispute it. It may not be perfect. There are limitations in certain methods, but at the end of the day, it's evidence. And again, you don't need evidence and data to maintain the status quo. But if you want to affect change, you have to have robust evidence and be able to make a tangible argument, not just show it, but tell us what it means. And so don't ever undersell yourself about you being able to do that and think that I'm powerless. You all have agency. And if you're weaponized with data, you're ready to go and take on these battles that you want to take on.
Mhm. Now we can go back to our mentees and mentors. Tess, you had a question in the chat. Would you like to unmute and ask?
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that AI surveillance and I think or AI surveillance led to higher levels of like false arrests in cases like I think it was like vehicle thefts compared to like violent crimes. Was there any like reason or explanation like found or proposed for why this might be?
That's a really good point. And so what we found was that we looked at the impact on racial disparities in the arrest. So we took the Black arrest rate in those different categories and divided by the white arrest rate. And so what they give you, say like a ratio of like, they give you like a ratio of like 5. So that means that the Black arrest rate is 5 times higher, of course, than the white rate. And so we took that approach. And when we parsed those things out, we did see those 2 categories. Now, this is what we think. First of all, there's already inequities when it comes to arrests. When it comes to violent arrests and offending, we know there's disproportionate offending and victimization in the Black community. We know that. The data shows that. It's unequivocal. Doesn't mean that we're violent, doesn't mean those things have a whole conversation. There's a lot to unpack there. But property crime and drugs, whenever we see disparities, it's because of differential treatment, not involvement. And so our thing is, it's not that we think that police departments are purposely going to use this technology to hunt down Black and brown people that's not it. Oftentimes, there are much of a victim of the system as well because police get paid by making arrests. You want to move up and get ranked, you make arrests. Most of our crimes are property crimes. Most of our property crimes that are felonies are burglaries, thefts, and motor vehicle thefts. And so if you're using these technologies in places that are more heavily Black and brown, your operations are concentrated there. It's not necessarily that they're using the technology discriminatory. What it means is that the system and the backdrop they're operating in, the more contacts they're having, the most arrested for those things, we're picking up on that. What this technology does, it amplifies the good and the bad. And so we feel like it's picking up on these tendencies already in how police operate. And it's less about even the technology, or we weren't able to test how agencies were using technology. Because mind you, it depends on the similarity score. Some places use a higher similarity score, because remember, it's not a one-to-one match when it spits out a match, right? Here's this image, and here's maybe a list of potential matches, and they have a similarity score. It's a probability of being the match, being more likely to be the match than not. Well, we still don't know what's the right probability score, right? And so that could be an issue. Officers are not trained in these technologies, and we're not sure if they even have the best of these technologies. So, but we really think it stems from, it really has exacerbated inequities that are already in police operations. And for you all out there, like, if you want, I know you're doing capstones, all this data I got, look, I download this data from home, man, like, because I want people to be able to go out and see these data. I don't go begging for new data. Like, I grew up in the South, right? And I grew up in the hood, right? So I don't ask my mama for a new pair of shoes if I hadn't put holes in the 2 pair of shoes I have. And I approach data the same way. There's so much data hidden in plain sight that we can answer some questions with. Now we get funding. Now we can ask about, we need to research this. Now we can do a random control trial in some city who's using this, a city that's not, right? And so, unfortunately, in this research, we're at the fundamental level of understanding what's going on. And so that's why we focus on, is it effective and is it equitable? Now let's dig in. And so unfortunately, we're right there. And so this is just the start. We're scratching the surface.
Thank you. Carice had a really interesting question, and I'm eager to have her to have them unmute and share the question with us.
First of all, thank you so much for talking with us tonight. You're a very engaging speaker. My question was, as AI-generated images become more prolific on the internet, do you anticipate there being problems with basically AI algorithms being fed content made by AI, so that now you have this facial recognition technology, which is being fed faces of people who do not actually exist? They're AI-generated images of people.
When I first started doing this work, and let me tell you, how's your name?
Carice.
Carice, I didn't want to butcher it because I butchered my own name. So Carice. That's, when we first started doing this research, the thing of deep fakes came out. And I was like, man, we're too far behind. They're already deep faking, right? We're just doing this one piece and they're deep faking already. And I think that is problematic. And it's not just in this. I mean, even when you start talking about the use of ChatGPT and AI and research, you've had papers retracted because people have created false data sets. And that makes it to published journals, right? And so beyond facial recognition, AI is a potential threat to the integrity of science, right? And so this is why we have to get ahead of it. And so I'm really concerned about these fake images being in there, but there are safeguards. You know, I propose for not all patrol officers having access to these technologies. It should be used for investigators or special units of people who are especially trained. It should only be signed off by a supervisor. And we should work with the software companies to understand what type of similarity score thresholds can be used and what type of situations. You know, we can't really, you know, because we're pulling mugshots and pictures and images from social media. You know, I tell my mom all the time, she does these things where it's the software makes you look like the AI generation of your picture. And I was like, what you're providing, you're feeding into the repository. And so, you know, that's a privacy concern, but also is that going to end up in these databases? And that's why software development is so important. You know, vetting the images, making sure we have secure repository, making sure we just don't pull images from any and everywhere because we can. Those are safeguards, but it's also the end user. Facial recognition policing is only a lead. We should not be basing arrests off of this. And the problem is we use it to establish probable cause, and we also use it to gather evidence, but we don't share this. There's no rules that we have to share discovery and let defendants know that, or the judge know that AI was used to help gather this technology, gather the evidence. We need those safeguards to protect what we can, because oftentimes, you know, that's going to be with tech companies. And look, you know, sometimes technology gets away from us, and sometimes our research and safeguards come way too late. I hope we hadn't gotten there yet, but I think by putting safeguards in place for the users and how we train can really help mitigate that. But the truth be told, is some things will still slip through the cracks, no matter how robust of a system you have. So, no, you're right. That's a big problem we're faced with, and that's why policies and laws are so important, because this is one example. There's other things where you can think of similar unintended consequences, right? And how things change over time. But research, policies, safeguard that stem from science are so important and critical for figuring this stuff out. So really great point. And I gave you a very politician answer. I actually run for politics sometimes. I gave you a very politician answer, but that's where we're at. And I don't want to, excuse my language, BS you. And I don't want to tell you something that's not quite true, right? You know, let's think of the beauty of science. If you don't know it, you can just say, you know what? I don't know it, but here's what we do know, right? And so, you know, that's the beauty of science. But that's a really wonderful question, and maybe something that you can do some research on, and we can figure this out. So there you go. That's your career right there. There you go. I'll be looking forward to it.
So we have just about 10 minutes left, so we have time for one or two more questions. So we'll start first with Anthony, who's one of our ambassadors, former mentor from last year. Would you like to unmute and ask your question, please?
Hey, Thaddeus, wonderful talk. I had two thoughts from this talk. The first was, did you obtain data for the study for the main one that you showcased from cities all across the country, or were there a couple cities that you selected from? And then my other kind of comment was, what were your thoughts about this software's implication for other bodies of the justice system? It seemed that a lot of these of what you were kind of mentioning might be for more localized areas of crime potentially, but what do you think are some of the potential drawbacks if these systems become successful and then they start being employed for like major points of entry, such as the US-Mexican border, for instance?
Yeah, which they're already doing, right?
Yeah.
They use, the Border Patrol is using it. So then really thank you for your kind words, and really great question, Anthony. So let me start with the first one. If you all look up the Bureau of Justice Statistics, LEMAS, LEMAS, it's Law Enforcement Management Administrative Statistics. You can download that data. And they sample, right? So any agency that has 100 officers or more, they're included in the sample. And so we have our largest agencies. When it comes to your smaller agencies, they sample and stratify based on region, size, agency type, all of those things. And so in our first study on arrests, we had every U.S. agency in there, local police department, not sheriffs, not state, not federal, local police department in the U.S. in there, in that one. And so that ended up being 1,100 agencies, but they all weren't agencies with more than 100. So we had some sampling weights with that, right? For the study about the homicides, it was 268 of the largest cities. And we had several 8 ways of data, right, that we put together going back from 97 to 2020. Well, you have attrition. Some agencies weren't in there. So what we were able to capture were all the agencies that appeared in each wave of data, and they were your larger cities, right? So your cities who had over 100 or more police officers, right? So your rural areas, suburban areas, we don't know, right? And so we talk about this in the setting of using this in the urban context, right? Using this technology, that's what we know. Other stuff we really don't know about it. So that's how we gather the data. Anybody can download those data. Now you asked about, I think if I'm correct, the role of just what does this mean writ large, right? You know, it seems like we're moving a step closer to things like Minority Report, those types of movies, right? Where, think about this. So let me say this. Let me talk about this. What's scary to me is this. You have automated facial recognition. You have agencies that have body-worn cameras. If you have facial recognition that can live time scan, you have police officers who are like RoboCop, who are walking and scanning you instantaneously as you walk down the street. Is that a Fourth Amendment issue? Should officers be able to do, you just can't stop and grab your IDs and do that on the street without having some calls, right? Should they be able to do those things? Does that turn us into a police and surveillance state, right? Will we have laws in place to make sure we mitigate those things? Those are the things that concern me. The problem is we have to do something. We have to do something at our border. We have to do something that makes up for our shortages. And it's not just for catching culprits. It's also technology used there's a lot of underreporting of crime, right? Particularly crimes like sexual assault. What if this technology was able to pick up on more witnesses, more victims, beyond even more offenders? And so there's a good side to it. I'm just afraid that without some type of laws in place and statutes in place that agencies would use it all willy-nilly. The agencies would lower their thresholds maybe in order to ramp up the likelihood of getting the arrest and establishing evidence. Those are some of the things that I'm really concerned about, but I'm not afraid of the technology. Who I'm afraid of is us, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for a wonderful, wonderful question.
All right, we have one more question from Brianna, one of our mentors. If you could unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for the great discussion and the presentation. You kind of already started answering it, I feel like, but I guess like while I was listening to you and just thinking about the implications of AI and just technology in general, do you think that it's forming at a rate that ethics and policy cannot keep up with, and that we are going to be in a worse position than we are now? I mean, if I'm thinking and like hearing things correctly too, one of the big ways that we need to get people to use this technology safely, police departments in particularly, is to acknowledge that there are inequities that exist. And I feel like that's something that, for the most part, we cannot even acknowledge yet. And so how are we going to ethically integrate this technology when we haven't even had a conversation about the nature of police departments and how they were created in general? Like, I don't know, I just kind of asked a loaded question, but yeah, feel free.
No, I love that. And look, I love these type of, look, like this is what we're here for, right? We're not here to baby around things. We're here to have real conversations. And so let me just start with this. A reporter asked me one time, how can we remove the racism out of policing? I said, well, let me ask you, how can you remove the racism out of America, right? And that's not an indictment of America. It's just acknowledging that this is the backdrop of what we're working in, right? And the question about it outpacing, unfortunately, that's always been the case, that policy, law, ethics has been outpaced by the adoption of technologies. right? And so will we end up in this place that's worse? I think that at least there's knowledge about it. Local officials and everyone, we're acknowledging that there are an issue. And I think AI really caught everybody off guard because we had no idea that it would advance so rapidly. It's been around for a while, but it's been an explosion in its capabilities, right? And those types of things. And we are behind federally, state, local, with the laws and ethics and the policies that are in place. I think places are, since George Floyd happened, I think there was a watershed moment for our nation that we can no longer deny that racism was alive and well, that there were systemic issues. Yes, we may not have things that happened in the Jim Crow South going on, but it's still just as destructive and it's still there. And it impacts no matter, even if you have the best of intentions with reforms, if you don't realize the realities of the backdrops in which you're working, you can make things worse, right? I mean, even when we had the war on drugs, it wasn't just politicians, it was people in the Black community saying, this is what we need to do. And it seemed like the right thing, because remember I told you the justice system is reactive. And so we saw that maybe we all were off about that. And what we tend to do, we tend to adopt things because we're trying to maintain the social order. We're trying to find the best thing to make us more efficient. They have the best intentions are there, but you're right. You can, I'm a former officer, so I can say this, right? This is not directed at police, but I tell people is that, you can take a pig and put lipstick on it, you're still gonna have your ham sandwich, right? It doesn't change that. And so I think people are recognizing that. I think cities are recognizing that. I even think that across the sphere, we're recognizing that when it comes to crime and things, that we can arrest our way out of these issues for long term. There are systemic issues there. I mean, you've even seen when it comes to the risk needs assessment instruments, they started redoing the algorithms, changing how they feed and train the algorithms because they recognize that criminal history really picks up as a proxy for systemic inequities, not behavior. And it disadvantages, certain people, particularly young Black males. And so we're recognizing that, but it's not fast enough. It's too far behind. And you're right. If we don't recognize that these technologies may can keep us safer, but also they may can also exacerbate inequities, that's not a choice that we should have to make in a democracy. And so you're absolutely right to be concerned about it. But I can confidently say that when we're making policies, like I'm going to New Mexico, they want us to do crime reduction efforts and start doing these things, but what are the equity consequences? And you didn't have that really before 3-4 years ago. And so I'm really encouraged that when we're making policies that we're thinking about that on the front end. Or if we've already done things, we're trying to revisit it. So, and that's it. So yeah, so it's not a magic bullet, but we are doing better. The justice system, we're starting to see things get better, but we have a long way to go. And we have to make sure that we don't make things worse with how we do things. Last thing, justice reinvestment and things like that in California, where nonviolent offenders, we moved them out into the local facilities and out of prison, shortened their sentences. Well, guess what happened? They increased disparities in imprisonment because now you have mostly 2/3 to 84% of violent offenders in California prisons. I just told you that systemic inequities cause more victimization among Black communities. But when you're making these policies and reforms, you did not think about that. And you made the inequities worse. And so people are starting to get the point, and we're starting to think about these things when it comes to lawmaking and implementing technology and reform. So really great question.
Wow. Well, thank you. This has been an incredibly important talk, and we are grateful to Dr. Thaddeus Johnson for spending this evening with us. To our audience, please extend your appreciation to our speaker in the chat. And thank you all for attending this community talk. Please visit our website, ourfutureisscience.org, and follow us on social media to learn about our initiative, future events, and our educational campaigns. Thank you. Mentors and mentees, don't log off. We have a few minutes devoted to you to ask for you to ask your questions. And I think everyone has completed the attendance form. And if you haven't, we'll drop that in the chat one last time.